My name is Anh Ngo. I'm an associate professor at Wilfred Laurier and a member of the Siinqee Institute. And this is our learning series where we, as a network of individuals or small groups coming together through different social, cultural, political, spiritual, and geographical boundaries, our shared dream is to reclaim the three basic Siinqee principles of connection, solidarity, equity, and justice to empower women and communities and facilitate, engage, vibrant communities and sustainable environments. So our learning series is opportunities for each one of us to kind of share a little bit about how we enter into these principles in our separate but conversing fields of work and study. And then just remind us for the virtual session as it is being recorded. The presentation will be recorded and shared on the Siinqee Institute's website for knowledge dissemination. If you don't want your name image to appear, please take a minute to rename yourselves and keep your video off and save your questions to when the recording has ended. So first, we start with a brief land acknowledgement. So coming from Wilfred Laurier and presenting to audiences from, for example, from Renison College at the University of Waterloo, one of the traditional territories of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. So as a migrant settler, I really like how Harsha Walia, a border studies scholar, talked about the concrete steps to undertaking settler responsibility. So Walia talks about understanding ourselves as complicit within settler colonialism from our different positionalities, taking up the responsibility to educate our communities about Indigenous histories and the lands we reside on, prioritizing active support for Indigenous self-determination, and steering away from seeking greater recognition from a colonial system, and going beyond demanding citizenship rights from a settler state. So this really speaks about the relationality piece, right? Because for many settler colonial states, the position or the relationship is usually from the state to the settler, right? So that's our frame of reference. But let's go beyond that and let's think about our relationship with the original peoples of this territory and the lands itself. Okay? And something else that I came to learn pretty recently, actually, is a practice of also having a labor and life affirmation statement. And this really acknowledges the labor of the peoples who were enslaved in building up the states and the states that we live in. And I came to learn this through my colleague in critical refugees and migrant studies, Adbi Ali, who is a brilliant scholar at the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change at York University. So Adbi's field is in Black Studies, diaspora, transnational migration. And Adbi had shared that there's a land acknowledgement written by a Professor Melina Abdullah, who is a member of BLM LA and Cal State University in LA. And I'm just going to read the labor and life affirmation. Breathe. We pay homage to those who were stolen from Africa, placed in bondage, falsely named as chattel, and forced into labor, who were called slaves but never submitted as such, who have always been fully human with an unbroken connection to the divine and to each other. We honor African ancestors for the still unpaid labor which built what is now the Americas. Breathe. To both Indigenous and African forebears, we commit to the continued struggle for liberation and reparations, for it is only through freedom and justice that we truly give honor. Ashe. So I think in this discussion of, migration and migration, Indigenous migrant relationality, I think, this life and labor affirmation is so important, especially as we go into the history of migration in Canada and really see how what it is that we kind of enjoy in the state now or are privileged of benefiting now is really from the labor of many peoples who were stolen from their lands, on lands that were stolen. So that brings me into the topic that I'm going to present today. It's immigration and social work. This is kind of these are kind of like the lens and the frameworks in which I kind of position myself when I, do any teaching or any studies with migrant communities. And I'll just go through like some of the key lens that kind of frames my work. Some of the key ideas are colonial continuities, right? When we think about how it is that we end up with an immigration system that we have today, racial capitalism as one of the key cornerstone logics to building this immigration system and how it becomes sustained today, right? All the oppressive features of it and oppressive structures and systems, how and why it continues to be maintained is through racial capitalism. And then as we position ourselves as social workers, well, some of us, right, thinking about how to center anti-racism and work with migrant peoples, and also centering intersectionality and anti-oppressive practice. And why is it that we need to center, right, anti-racism? But as we're centering anti-racism, we need to also center an anti-colonialism as well. So within Canada anyways, we have the calls to action. There are 94 calls to action under the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was out back in 2015. And unfortunately, even to this day, about 13 of these calls to actions have been achieved. And we're approaching the 10-year anniversary of it now. But the calls to action that are very relevant in working with, when we think about working with migrant and refugee peoples, is numbers 93 and 94, which is, how do we have a more inclusive history of the diverse Indigenous peoples on this land? And how is it that all of us, regardless of how we came to be on this land, enact our responsibilities as treaty peoples? And then, so I think about this as I think about an anti-colonial lens to the work that I do, is that, Indigenous peoples cannot be racialized as one of the many ethnocultural groups, right? Because if we do racialize them as one of the many groups, then this erases their ancestral and legal claims to the land. All efforts against racism must make Indigenous presence and experiences foundational to anti-racism, right? So they cannot be excluded from conversations of anti-racism. Indigenous peoples are not just another interest groups, because once they are positioned as just another interest group, then we get into really the colonial game of who's the most oppressed, right? Pitting oppressed peoples against one another. While we ignore the central dominance and the hegemony of white supremacy. So it's really, a decolonial anti-racism is rooted in a relational analysis of differences, right? And then, so one of the key concepts to think about working with migrant peoples is colonial continuity, and many scholars, kind of talk about this concept of colonial continuity. I came across it through the work of Barbara Heron, who's a scholar that looks at critiques and interrogates developmental work, international developmental work. So really, colonial continuity is a concept, or like a sense making of the colonial period of racism, where there's the idea of biological inferiority, religious doctrines that justified, right, racial ordering and racial hierarchies, to this post-colonial period where the ideas of liberty, human rights, and equality are espoused, but are hidden and veiled behind discourses of civility, modernity, moral benevolence, protectionism, the idea of having knowledge over means having power over, and then the power to enact the reality based on this knowledge that's supported by white supremacy. So the ideas of white European supremacy, development and modernity, capitalist expansion, these are all ideas that have colonial roots, albeit they may be hidden or they may be veiled under guises of modernity and liberty. Right? So it's a coding of racism that happens within and that persists in our immigration system today. And here are some quotes from our elected officials. The latest one is from Doug Ford, who was twice elected as Premier of Ontario. So for Siinqee members who are outside of Ontario, our system is not doing as well. So well either. So he says, you come here like every other new Canadian has come, you work your tail off. If you think you're going to collect the dough and sit around, not going to happen. So this is a coding of racism, right? That happens, that persists from the 1900s to today, that equates certain characteristics with certain racial groups and really xenophobic sentiments. So why do we need to have an immigration system, right? Why do we need to have it and then to veil it behind some very thinly veiled racist discourses? It's because of the idea of racial capitalism. So this was first developed by Cedric Robinson under Black Marxism. This was like 1989, but then kind of I came across it through the work of Jody Melamed. Who then, built off of some of this work, right? So the idea that capital can only be capital when it's accumulating, and it can only accumulate by producing and moving through relations of severe inequality among human groups. So I really think about that, right? When you think about profits, when you think about, accumulation, about some of the messages that we hear, making development and progress, doing well in the economy. This is all because of some, there has to be some sort of inequality in order to have that excess, right? So capital progress means that there's excess, there's extra, right? And I really think about these relations of severe inequality and how it's really built into the immigration system. So Canadian growth within Canada and many other so-called Western countries are experiencing similar stalled growth. Actually, as of in 2022, Canada, the only reason Canada even had a population growth was because of immigration. So you can see two charts here. It's a little bit dated. It's like 2006, 2017, but the situation hasn't changed much, right? Well, you see the population, the working population of migrants has grown while the population of working Canadian-born folks have stalled, if not dipped slightly. So for our capitalist economy to continue to grow, we need immigration bodies, right? We need immigrant bodies. And we need them because it's a billion-dollar business. So migration within the global system is billions of dollars in terms of industry, in terms of remittances, in terms of contributing growth, right? And immigrant people, right, are very attractive assets within capitalist systems because we're often expendable, right? So migrant folks contribute more to taxes than they receive in benefits, right, with our aging society. They come better educated than the retiring population. However, they are the most expendable, often the first to lose jobs, work for less pay, longer hours, worse conditions, experience all sorts of types of oppression, right? Quite many structures and factors to vulnerability. Yet we need them for our population growth. We need them for our population growth, but they are always positioned as outside of the nation and as expendable when things get tough. And we structure in this vulnerability and this oppression through like actual programs that we support, right? So the temporary foreign worker program, it's and I think the United States also has a similar program. It's we bring in thousands of workers every year to do work that the existing population does not want to do, and for much less pay, and for enormous precarity. So the logics of colonial continuities, right? Maintaining race-based hierarchies, no matter how much we veil or what kind of whatever discourse we put it under, combined with racial capitalism, the need for access due to access that can only be produced through systems and structures and relationships of inequality, means that we have a very carefully designed system under the logics of inclusion and exclusion. So we are including people at the same time that we're excluding them. Right? And history shows this, the major historical trends that kind of sees our policy moving through, right, these colonial logics of inclusion and exclusion to having the system that we have today. So as of in 2022, we had nearly 700,000 temporary foreign workers coming to the stolen territory to work to produce capitalist excess for the owners, for the state, and on the other hand, we have about 470,000 permanent residents, right? And there's a very complicated system on how to place people, and at the same time, we also have displaced peoples. So I think about displacement and dispossession as simultaneous operations of imperialism, land theft, and at the same time moving people from subjects of legal rights of statehood and state protection to subjects of charitable humanitarianism, right? So to go from a person with some sort of state protections to a person who is vulnerable to, some charitable giving whenever we feel like it. And this is very deliberate, and this is very much, methodically operated. So I'm almost running out of time, but those are some of the ideas or the critical concepts that we can move into social work with immigrant peoples with. And when we do that, it allows us to look at, right, how do we enact social work with refugee and migrant peoples, but doing it in such a way that honors intersectionality, right, honors the differences that people come with, and the structural differences and the ways that we view and understand peoples. And so there are some tips on working with newcomer women, right? Working with 2S plus LGBTQIA newcomers, really questioning or practicing our critical reflexivity to think about our values, knowledge, our self-awareness, and our skills when it comes to working with people who in many ways are quite vulnerable to intersectional oppression, right? And then working with people with disabilities. So how do we simultaneously push against the structures of immigration, right? While at the same time working with individuals to honor their knowledges, their abilities that they come with, to honor their wishes and choices for migration.